What up friends, my name is Stan from RandomTens, and after a lengthy review process of Pokémon Emerald, it's time we simplify things a bit as we take a look at the Gen 1 remakes Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Released only a few years after Ruby and Sapphire, and largely developed by the same team, these two games were made with the intention of bringing back some of the series' older players while still trying to appeal towards younger children who may have missed out on the first generation of games. Needless to say, the union of old and new proved incredibly successful, and the two remakes would go on to become the second best-selling Game Boy Advance titles, right after Ruby and Sapphire. Which was not only amazing considering it had only been 6 years since Red and Blue were released in North America, but also further cemented Pokémon as the most bankable series of handheld games. Now, as some of you are aware, I'm not the biggest Gen 1 guy out there. However, just because I don't enjoy those games as much as some others do, doesn't mean I hate them. In fact, I actually think they're very original, and I can admit, without them we wouldn't have this phenomenal series in the first place. It's just, by today's standards, they're a little messy, at least in my opinion. However, this brings us to their remakes, Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Do they take everything I loved about the originals and expand and improve upon them? Or do they get lost in translation just a little bit? Well, let's find out.
Wait, Stan, don't start the review yet.
Roy, what are you doing in my review?
Don't worry about that. I'm here to help you with your Gen 1 problem.
My what problem?
You know how you despise everything about Gen 1 and try to ruin it for everyone else by hating on it in like every video?
What are you talking about? I love Gen 1.
Oh, so that's why you gave Red and Blue a 6 out of 10.
Those games are painful to play. I just explained all this.
Right, and what was your first generation of Pokemon games?
Gen 2.
Face it, dude, you missed out on Gen 1 and now you'll never be able to give it the respect that it deserves.
That's why I'm reviewing Fire Red and Leaf Green.
I know, and that's why I'm here. You thought you could get away with reviewing my favorite remakes without me?
Favorite remake? Fine, you can join for this review, but just this once.
Sweet.
Sorry about that, folks. Without further delay, here's my mini review of Pokémon Fire Red and Leaf Green. Once again, we begin our Pokémon adventure in the Kanto region, where our young protagonist Red has just turned 10. Because he's reached this milestone of maturity, he's given either Bulbasaur, Charmander, or Squirtle as his starter Pokémon, and with a quest to fill up his Pokédex, he sets out with his rival Blue to see who can be the very best like no one ever was. Along his journey, Red will battle gym leaders, collect a variety of creatures through catching, trading, and evolving the 150 Pokémon found within Kanto, and even thwart the devious plans of Team Rocket, a crime syndicate who wish to control everything. And eventually, after their leader Giovanni is beaten, and Red successfully claimed his 8th gym badge, it's time for him to take on the Elite Four challenge to finally prove that he's a true Pokémon master. Now, I know that's an incredibly condensed retelling of the game's story, but for the most part, this is a very faithful remake, keeping most core elements and plot threads intact. Red is still a mute protagonist, Blue is still as dickish as ever, and overall this version of Kanto is almost an exact replica of the one from Red and Blue. I mean it, besides a few double battles here and there, this is the region you remember, just with added depth and less glitches. Oh, and because you guys would kill me if I didn't mention it, you can now play as a female hero named Leaf rather than Red. However, as cool as this is, I've always thought of Gen 1 as Red's story, so that's who I'll be referring to throughout this video.
There are, however, two areas in which the plot differs, that being after you've obtained the Volcano Badge from Blaine, and when you've beaten the Elite Four for the first time. In the first instance, Bill will meet you upon exiting Cinnabar's gym and ask you to travel to the Sevi Islands with him to aid his friend Celio. Celio is basically the PC guy for the islands, an almost tropical resort made up of 7 distinct land masses. However, for now, we can only visit the first 3.
After a series of fetch quests and a chance at catching Moltres in its new home atop Mount Chimney, Celio and Bill will get the island's PC system working, and you'll head back to Kanto to continue your Elite Four challenge. Once the champion is defeated, however, you can continue your save file and unlock the National Dex from Professor Oak, who will only award you with the upgrade after you've captured at least 60 Pokemon on your journey. This is one of those things I couldn't stand as a kid, but now that I'm older, I really think this was a smart way to introduce more Pokemon into the mix. If you're the type of player who lives for Gen 1, you can complete the entire game, barely filling up your Pokédex with no repercussions. You'll get an almost identical experience to Red and Blue, and heck, you can even capture Mewtwo and the 3 legendary birds. However, by making the National Dex essentially the key to opening up your Pokemon journey, it incentivizes players to catch dozens of Pokemon along the way, which in turn may lead you to using some monsters you'd never even thought to before. Amazingly enough, this was my first playthrough of any main series game using a Cloyster or Arcanine on my team, and now that I finished, I would easily put these two creatures among my favorite Gen 1 Pokemon. Instead of being like some generations where you need to see every Pokemon in the regional dex before you can continue your adventure, capturing 60 Pokemon feels just right. And it's actually a stipulation that I think makes playing these games even better. Regardless, once Red does obtain the National Dex from the Good Professor, he and Blue will travel back to the Sevi Islands in order to help Celio upgrade his current system. Our protagonist then travels to the remaining islands, now crawling with elusive Johto Pokemon, and acquires the Ruby and Sapphire along the way. This is also where we get our last bit of story in the form of Team Rocket. With Giovanni disappearing, the group is in disarray as they've set up camp on 5 Island and are gathering members across the region to help them find their crime boss. This plot addition was clearly added in as a way of setting up Team Rocket's eventual return 3 years later in the Johto region, and actually injects a little humanity into the remaining members. As far as I can tell, their main executives are the same two who take over Goldenrod Radio Tower in Gold and Silver, and despite Red trying to tell them that Giovanni's gone for good, their refusal to accept defeat is sort of heartbreaking, if a little pathetic.
Anyways, after Red beats the two and they flee the hideout, the Sevi Islands really open up and you can partake in a variety of puzzles and mini-games. Although beyond the Battle Tower and the daycare, there's nothing that really creates replayability here. The Battle Tower itself is only okay. I mean, it gives the game a little more meat and it does help the player get some key items for completing the Pokédex, but other than that and the chance to see some shinies that you'll never be able to catch, it's a shallow precursor to Emerald's Battle Frontier.
And when it comes to battling and sheer gameplay, this is where Fire Red and Leaf Green probably differentiate the most from their original counterparts. I've already mentioned that there are a few random double battles scattered throughout the region, but in general, the mechanics and battle engine are virtually identical to the ones used in Ruby and Sapphire. This is actually a welcome change for me, as one of my biggest issues with Red and Blue were the lack of fairness in battles. No one type feels broken in these games due to the balancing of Gen 2, and natures and abilities make a return, meaning these games immediately offer more strategy than their archaic ancestors. Again, Gen 1 is still playable from a battling standpoint, but these games just feel a lot more fair. Players can also acquire items and moves that didn't previously exist in these games, including berries and HMs like Waterfall, but most of these things aren't necessary to progress in the plot, which means if you're a Kanto purist, you can probably avoid having to use them altogether. The other obvious new feature in these games is the upgraded presentation, and I've got to imagine that for most folks in 2004, this was the reason to buy these games. There are those in the Pokemon community that will still argue about Gen 1 having the best story and the best gameplay, but where those two elements could be considered subjective, there's no denying that these two games look and sound much better than the originals. Sure, the trumpets from Gen 3 make a comeback here, and that sort of thing's not for everyone, but in my opinion, these games take that iconic soundtrack and somehow give it even more flavor. Seriously, I think so far objectively, these have been my favorite games to listen to while recording footage. Although, due to the limited amount of songs from this region originally, there's some repetition, and I do wish we could have gotten a few more new tracks, especially in regards to the Sevi Islands. But still, this is wonderful stuff, and there were plenty of moments like long stretches of surfing or puzzles where the music helped relieve the boredom.
And speaking of nostalgia, it's gotta be said that seeing these original 151 Pocket Monsters with their colorful Gen 3 sprites is an absolute treat. Each Pokemon has so much personality, and going from this to this really helps encapsulate how far the series has come. Seriously, just look at how amazing some of these Pokemon look with the added depth and color.
I think it's also worth mentioning that these were the games that finally did away with the iconic link cables we'd come to know and love, instead bundling Fire Red and Leaf Green with a wireless adapter that made trading much easier. Trading itself remained virtually untouched, but this new device made the sometimes grueling process feel much more natural, and I remember being in awe of this thing when I first unboxed mine, as I'd never actually owned my very own link cable. And finally, although I probably should have mentioned this earlier, you can catch one of the legendary beasts in these games once you've received the National Dex. So why did I take so long to bring this up? Because I hate roaming legendaries, especially this guy. In actuality, because there's only one this time, it's not nearly as painful to catch whichever roaming beast you've unlocked, but it was still very much a pain to record footage of Entei for this review, and if you can't tell, I'm still just a little bitter about the 6 hours I wasted trying to find the damn thing in my Crystal review. Oh, and which dog you can get depends on which starter you chose, with Entei being unlocked if you picked Bulbasaur, and Suicune and Raikou being set loose upon the region if you chose Charmander or Squirtle respectively. In fact, next to the inclusion of a roaming legendary, which admittedly isn't even a real problem, the only other issue I had with this game was the level of assistance it sometimes forces onto players. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the classic mystery and discovery elements of this game are still intact, but I couldn't help but notice that especially at the beginning, there was an awful lot of handholding going on. At one point, the game even shows you how to battle, which is made all the worse by the fact that they use your first battle with Blue as the tutorial. Also, this could just be me, but I felt as though Professor Oak's aids were a lot more helpful in these remakes, and overall the game felt a lot less challenging despite the advanced battling system. Maybe I'm just more competent due to coming right off of playing Emerald, or maybe picking Bulbasaur right away is essentially this game's easy mode, but I found very few instances where I felt panicked that I might lose a battle, which decreased the amount of tension and made winning feel less meaningful. But besides all of that, I would highly recommend these games as the definitive Kanto experience. Sometimes remakes can be either too similar or too different from the originals, but I feel that this is one instance where the developers got it just right. The gameplay and story only improved upon the solid foundation set by Red and Blue, while still keeping the things that worked in the originals, such as the collecting and progression, almost identical. Oh, and your bag is way bigger, and Pokeballs don't miss their targets, which felt oh so satisfying this time around.
I agree entirely, and despite always having a soft spot for the original 3 games, I have to admit, the remakes are the best way to play these games. Improved graphics, a richer soundtrack, and just enough additions to continue Red's story, without ruining it. All of this makes for a stellar retelling, and yet somehow it manages to keep all of the nostalgia perfectly intact. It's clear that unlike some of the remakes we see today, these games are crafted out of a love for the fans, rather than just a cash grab, and I think that's one of the reasons the games are still so popular today.
So for those of you out there who love the originals but just can't seem to get into the newer games, I would suggest starting here. They're smart and well-paced reversions that know exactly how to put you in a nostalgic state of mind while still knowing when to mix things up for the better, and they might be the most fun I've ever had playing a Pokemon game, period. Well folks, there you have it, my mini review of Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope it was a fitting end to Pokemonth 2016. I know I didn't go as in-depth on this one as I have in the past, however, that's because it's a remake and I really wanted to avoid retreading old ground. I also really want to thank RoyBoy140 for being in this video, as I've done 2 back-to-back Pokemon reviews now, and that can get super tedious, so it always helps having a friend in your corner. So, once again, thank you RoyBoy for being in this video.
No problem, Stan, and it was an absolute blast to look at some of my favorite games with you. Hey, I think we cured your Gen 1 problem too.
Don't you have a DK64 review to make?
Whoops, yeah, we'll get the time, oh!
Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyways, moving forward, some really big things are happening to the channel. As some of you have probably already noticed, the banner and the profile picture have changed. That's because I recently bought a new PC, and it's a very good PC, so hopefully that means more videos, better videos, and maybe even some streams are coming to this channel in the fall. I'm really excited for this, and I'm also really excited to eventually get into my Pokemon Gen 4 in-depth review, which for those of you wondering, will probably be coming a little bit earlier this year, right before Sun and Moon. At least that's the plan for now. I'd also like to eventually do Pokemon Sun and Moon as, you know, the iron is hot and those games are releasing, so look forward to that as well. But anyways, thank you to every single person who's helped this channel grow to the point it's at now. It's incredible, and I really hope you guys enjoyed this review. And as I always say, happy hunting, baby rhinos. Peace.